Ryan, you dropped the word recruiting. So the
Oh,
2025 class wasn't up to USC standards, but then they really got their ducks lined up in regards to the administration, the approach, getting NIL, the GM in line, all of that in line. Can you kind of take us through this renaissance that's happened very quickly with USC's recruiting approach?
yeah, the fans are USC fans, at least they're pretty happy about it. Like Oregon's been coming down to Southern California, eating their lunch for a couple of years. And in general, USC has not been the quickest to adapt to changing in the landscape of the sport. And, you can go all the way back to when the early signing period first started out. USC was expecting to sign a whole bunch of guys in February, where most everyone else in the country was like, it's December now, and you're going to sign 85% of your guys in December. And USC sort of like didn't figure that out. So they had like a weird class because they thought a bunch of guys would wait until February, and they didn't. And I think with NIL, they were slow in that aspect too, even getting involved in the recruiting aspect of it, not just NIL for players that are on campus. You need to incorporate that into the recruiting game. I think they started doing that more last year. They had a pretty good war chest. They raised money, and I give Jen Cohen, the athletic director, a lot of credit. She's more of a forward-thinking kind of person, where they've had sort of subpar athletic directors in the past, and they weren't really on top of that. I think Jen Cohen is. So last year, I felt like they had money, but they didn't really have they didn't spend it well. They didn't really know the ins and out of contracts and things like that. And this offseason, they went out and hired a bunch more people in their personnel department. And Chad Bowden was starting it all, coming over from Notre Dame and from their general manager. And he put together a roster that went to the national championship game. And then he's now at USC. And they actually have 3 former college general managers on their staff now. They've built that up. They've really invested into personnel staff because it's a different game. The head coaches are used to just controlling everything, but do you want to be worried about contracts and retention and all these things? And it's so much more to building your roster than going out and, talking to these kids and convincing their parents is the place to go and show them your facilities and all that stuff. It's just changed a lot. So I think you need those extra bodies in the building, and they've done that. And I think you're seeing the results like right away, where they're focusing on recruiting local talent a lot more than what Lincoln Riley was doing before. You're in Mater Dei, you're in St. John Bosco, places like that, where USC was recruiting like Georgia really hard and Texas, and it's still hard to get out-of-state guys, even with being able to pay them now. So it's guys that are local. If they commit early, they're much less likely to decommit than if someone that's in a state, 2,000 miles away. I think they're getting that now. They're really focusing on the local talent, but also still going outside. So to me, it's more about, when you're seeing success, like look at leadership changed, and they actually changed their personnel department. And that's, I think, to my opinion, why you're seeing the better results on the recruiting trail.
I am not a recruiting guy or recruiting guru. I talk to guys like you every day. So by extension, I'm in it all the time. So it's been historically California, Texas, and Florida, of course, on that top line. Recent years, correct me if I'm wrong, Georgia seems to have eclipsed California in regards to quality and quantity of 4 and 5 stars, but California is still right there. What is the status of California high school football right now?
Yeah, I think it's changed some. It depends on the state, and I think there's certain states that are embracing high school football more. I mean, Texas always has. We're seeing a lot more of that in Georgia. And I think in California in general, there's just more like concerned parents, and there's more flag football and less tackle football. There's still a lot. And I think, California is still supplying the whole West Coast and a lot of, other places in the country with talent. I think skill guys, quarterbacks are up and down the coast. You're seeing those guys everywhere. The big programs from other states and other conferences are using California quarterbacks still a lot of the skill position guys. I think the biggest deficit has been at the line play. There's not as many of those big guys running around that can 300 pounds when they're 17-year-old and can move. There's more projection, I think, where there's like a 250-pound, he might be playing some tight end and defensive end, but he's probably going to be a left tackle when he gets to college. And so you're seeing more guys like that where you have to sort of project out a little bit more. So I think it's just a combination of some things, but the best programs in the country, like Mater Dei and St. John Bosco, like they'll win national championships. They're those kind of programs that they're tippity top of the sport. But I think in general, there's a lot of depth in California. We're just seeing less of it on the lines. And I think that's where a state like Georgia and Florida, you're seeing more of those guys than you would see in California.
Because Ryan, I love the history of the sport, and I try to take the history if we have current issues and see, okay, this I don't feel does apply, or this does apply historically. And when I look at USC, my goodness, you can look at Ohio State might be the standard in regards to consistent excellence. Obviously, Alabama under Saban, and we could go down the list. But when USC is right, John McKay, his best teams, John Robinson, his best teams, obviously Pete Carroll, his best teams. I don't know that there have been better teams in the history of college football than when USC gets it right.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that. It's they've had heyday back in the 30s, 100 years ago with and then the 60s and 70s and 80s and obviously the Pete Carroll years have sort of bring that back, and then they've fallen off again. I think it's sort of a unique situation where you do have, Miami's a big urban area, and they were good, especially, in the 90s and 2000s and stuff. But, Los Angeles being it's the biggest media market that has major college football, because New York doesn't really have that. You can't really count Rutgers, no offense to Rutgers people, but that's not a major market. I mean, you have USC and UCLA, where UCLA has all the basketball championships and USC has all the football championships. So it's kind of unique. And being on the West Coast and having two historic venues that were built 100 years ago in the Coliseum and the Rose Bowl, which is, kind of weird just to have those just down the street from each other. And the proximity to other major programs where, like, if Alabama's good, well, so is Georgia, so is LSU, or so is Tennessee or Florida. The USC, when they were like big, they were like the 900-pound gorilla, and there wasn't really a lot around to mess with them. So I think there was a lot of unique factors, like when USC is good. And I don't know if it's a coincidence that like sort of the fall of USC was like the rise of the SEC. And if Alabama is going to get all this attention, or Georgia, but there's something about, like, if USC has that attention, it's like this, it's a whole different thing. And maybe it's because they're like sort of on their own. Like Georgia, I mean, if you got Oregon way up the coast, they've been doing well, but there's really nothing like it on the West Coast, where you can hit a rock and find a major SEC program that's won a bunch of championships and stuff. So I don't know. It's kind of a unique factor to it, but there is, and the weather and all that. I think some of that is, it's like people want USC to be good. There's like something good about the sport. And especially now things have been so regionalized. I think you need the West Coast to kind of, and no more Pac-12. You need someone on the West Coast to step it up. Can it be Oregon? I mean, it could be, but there's no replacing if USC is really good. They can kind of do things that probably no one else can do.
Absolutely.